Okay, now we are at module number 4, and this is the codes the buildings live by. So what we're going to be going over today is the international building codes, a couple of the chapters, a couple subchapters, so that way you can understand the types of fire alarm systems and the different types of classifications that they have out there. All right, so let's just get straight into it. So the international building code sets the minimum requirements for building safety, including occupancy classifications and life safety systems like a fire alarm system. To understand the building code requirements for a fire alarm system, alarm initiation, enunciation, and monitoring are the requirements. In section 907 of the Fire Alarm and Detection Center, IBC and IFC, IBC is the International Building Code, IFC is the International Fire Code. I want you to understand the requirements that's outlined in section 907 of the IBC and the IFC, which dictate the fire alarm and detection systems are required, what features must be included, and how they must be configured based on the building occupancy type and the hazardous classifications. So when is a fire alarm system required? Per section 907, a fire alarm and detection system is required in a building that's based on the different types of occupancy classification, whether it's group A, B, R, I, or etc. The occupancy load, how many people, the building height and or the number of stories of the building, anything over 75 feet. Does it have a presence of automatic sprinklers? Yes or no? Is this a special use or a hazardous condition area, some type of hospital, biolab, or anything like that? So the different type of occupancy groups, here we have group A, assembly. If there are 300 or more occupants where amplification and voice evac is used. Group B is business, when the occupancy load is more than 500 or when it's required by specific function like a clinic. Group R1 is for hotels. Smoke detection in all sleeping areas and manual pull stations are required. Group R2 is for apartments. Manual pull stations and notification requirements is required in the corridors. Group E is for educational. It's required when you have 30 or more occupants and you have to have a voice evac in some of these jurisdictions. And Group I is institutional. Detection in sleeping areas and notifications throughout the building. Now the local AHJ may exceed or amend any of these codes, so you always want to check with your local AHJ before you implement any type of fire alarm design or any type of fire alarm system. So in 907.4 is where they talk about the initiating devices. Initiating devices must be installed in locations based on a hazardous code and the requirements for that physical location. Manual pull stations need to be near all the exits and stairwells. Smoke detectors need to be in corridors, sleeping areas, elevator lobbies, elevator machine rooms, storage rooms. Duct detectors are installed on air handlers that are more than 2,000 CFMs on the supply side. If it's on the exhaust side, it needs to be more than 15,000 CFM and serving 2 or more floors. Waterflow switches and valve tampers must be on a sprinkler, must be monitored by the fire alarm system. 907.5 talks about the occupant notification. Audible notification must comply with IBC 907.5.2.3.3 in groups R1 and R2. Visual strobes must be installed per ADA, which is the American Disabilities Act. Voice evac is required in high-rise buildings, assembly occupancies over a certain threshold, and Group M, which is mercantile or any building over 75 feet tall. 907.6 talks about the installation and monitoring of the fire alarm system. A fire alarm system must automatically transmit any and all events to an approved central station, so that way they can either get the fire department there or call the customer if there's a trouble or just some supervisory emergency. Some of the transmission methods that you can use to transmit signals is phone lines, or you can have a dual IP cell communicator or a cellular communicator, but you would need 2 forms of communication. So if you're just using a cell communicator, that will have to be the backup, and you will have some type of phone line or dial tone for the primary signal. So some of the signals that get transmitted from the fire alarm control panel is alarm signals, any alarm event, any trouble event, or any supervisory event that happens over the fire alarm system. Now, priority 1 is an alarm. So if there's an alarm event that arrive at the central station, they're going to automatically dispatch the fire department. Any other priority 2 or priority 3 type event, they will just call the customer, email, or send them a text. Now, 907.8 talks about the inspection, testing, and maintenance of the fire alarm system. A fire alarm system must be tested in accordance with section 907.8 of the International Fire Code. It must pass the functional end-to-end testing when the AHJ is present. So your final fire alarm test after you install the system must be tested, actually scheduled and tested by the fire department for them to give you the letter of recommendation. Section 907.2 talks about the fire alarm systems that is required by the occupancy group. For you to understand what requirements for each occupancy group as defined in section 907.2 of the International Building Code, this is based on the occupancy load, building use, and the life safety needs. Why does section 907.2 matter so much? This section breaks down a lot of the subsections when it comes to the occupancy classification. It lets you know when a fire alarm system must be installed, what type of components must be installed on the fire alarm system based on the application, where it must be installed, rather if it's a sleeping room, corridors, lobbies, etc., which exceptions may apply, meaning if your building is fully sprinkled, you may not need smoke detection in that particular area. You may just need manual activation instead of automatic activation, but you may need to monitor the sprinkler system with water flows and tampers. So if you don't understand any of this, 907.2 can design all of your legal compliance when you come to putting your fire alarm system together. Now, the subchapters in 907.2, starting with 907.21, is Group A, assembly. This applies to theaters, auditoriums, churches, gyms, and also stadiums. The fire alarm system is required when the occupancy load is more than 300 or the load is more than 100 if the space is located above the level of exit discharge, meaning if there's more than 100 on one particular floor, which is the second floor above the first floor, then a fire alarm system is required because they need to know if there's an emergency on any other floor so they can get out of the building. 907.2.2 is Group B. This talks about businesses. This applies to offices, banks, and outpatient clinics. A fire alarm system is required when the occupancy load is more than 500 or more than 100 people on the floor that levels the exit of discharge, and is an outpatient clinic providing sedation or anesthesia. Manual pull stations, horns and strobes, speaker strobes, and automatic detection is required if it's not fully sprinkled. 907.2.3 talks about Group E, and this is educational. This applies to K1 through 12. This applies K through 12. This applies to schools and daycares all the way from kindergarten all the way up to the 12th grade, or anything that's greater than 2.5 hours per day. This is required when the occupancy load is more than 30 people. You must have pull stations, horns and strobes, automatic smoke detection in corridors unless it's fully sprinkled, and a voice evac may be required based on a local AHJ, especially if it's a college or a big dorm. You definitely going to need an evac and voice system. 907.2.6 talks about Group I. This is for institutional. This applies to hospitals, nursing homes, jails, and mental health facilities. Smoke detection. And Group I1/I2, which is for healthcare, smoke detection is required in corridors, nurses station, and also in the sleeping areas. It must be fully supervised and report to the central station. Group I3 is for detention centers. This is required zone smoke detection and manual override capability. Special rules applies based on the confinement levels. So this would be a very intricate system that you would have to put together when it comes to a detention center. Group M is for mercantile. This applies to retail stores and malls. A fire alarm system is required when the occupancy load is more than 500, or you have 3 or more stores, or the combined floor area is more than 12,000 square feet on any multiple level. You must have manual pull stations, water flow initiated alarms, and voice evac for large shopping malls per 907.2.7.3. 907.2.8 talks about Group R1, and this is the residential. Group R1 stands for hotels and motels, smoke detection in each of the guest rooms, notification in the public corridors, manual pull stations unless is exempt and is fully covered with sprinklers, and low frequency audible sounder bases inside of the sleeping areas. Group R2 is for apartments and dorms, detection in corridors and in the common areas, notification appliance in all units required by the local AHJ, and pull stations unless they are exempt. And Group R4 is for the assisted living. This requirement is like I1 or R2 depending on the facility type. So that is the end of module number 4, the codes the building live by. And I want you to know that this is just a smidget of the 81-hour course. You're gonna have to sit through 10 to 12 hours per day on a Saturday and Sunday, going through 5 different modules, so that way you could understand what each module is trying to teach you and how you could better be prepared to take your New York State exam. All right, so I'll catch you in the next video where I'll show you how you can get yourself registered with the New York City Fire Department so you can start doing installs in New York City. All right, so in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can get yourself registered with the New York City Fire Department so that way you can start doing installs in New York City. All right, I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.